All very welcome tonight. My name is Frank Dorr. I'm one of the steering group for Elders for Earth. And I'm really honored to be the one to introduce this new series of talks on spirituality and the earth. So just a few words first about Elders for Earth. It's part of SHEP Earth Aware, as many of you know, and we'll give you details in the chat box later and on a slide at the end about how to make contact with either the part or with SHEP Earth Aware. It was decided to give Elders for Earth its own name and identity to highlight the role of older people in responding to the many crises facing the earth. They hardly have to name them: climate change, biodiversity loss, climate injustice, intergenerational injustice, and so on. We live in a society of rapid technological change in which older people are often treated as a problem rather than as a resource. At worst, a burden on society, and at best, a group to be encouraged to stay healthy and take up some enjoyable pastime. Where other societies believe that wisdom comes with age and valued it, in Western society, youthful energy is what is thought of as important usually. And of course, many of us oldies buy into that view of ourselves and disempower ourselves. Elders for Earth wants to work against that idea and to help us to see that as older people, we have the capacity and also the responsibility to make our own particular contribution to the effort to heal this wounded world of ours. So it wants to help us believe that rather than accepting the dismissal that often goes with words like elderly or senior citizen, we can actually be active elders of the tribe, as it were. And we can stand in solidarity, literally and metaphorically, with the young people who are concerned about the impoverished world they are facing. And we can bring to the struggle whatever wisdom and perspective we have harvested from our lifetimes of experience. This series of talks on spirituality and the earth is part of our effort to cultivate and share that wisdom. We take the word spirituality in a broad sense as referring to our deepest questions about the meaning and value of our world and of our place in it. And we're especially interested in how different ways of approaching those questions relate us to the rest of nature, especially at this time when the fabric of life on Earth is torn and heading towards collapse. So in this series, we're asking people from different wisdom and faith traditions to share their personal view from within their own tradition. We're less interested in getting accurate scholarly accounts of each tradition, but rather in having heart speak to heart, and in being inspired by the personal witness of someone who is deeply engaged in finding meaning in the situation in which we and the rest of nature find ourselves today. Our plan is to have a talk each month with speakers from different traditions. And we have lined up about 6 talks so far, so we are very optimistic for this. The talks will normally be on the 3rd Wednesday of each month, apart from an exception such as this when Patrick's Day got in our way, but normally they'll be on the 3rd Wednesday. So we hope to have a talk in March, April, and May. We'll probably break for the summer at that point, and particularly because in June on the appropriate day, there's another talk that we'll be telling you about, organized by a different group, one that you might be interested in. So while I'm talking about the series, I might just note that this series takes its place alongside 2 other series that SHEP Earth Aware is currently involved in partnership with other groups. One series is called Fridays for Earth, and that's in collaboration with Cork Environmental Forum. and that's on the evening of the second Friday of each month. And the other series is called Greening Our City, which is on the afternoon of the last Tuesday of the month. And that's in collaboration with 5 other groups, including Cork Chamber of Commerce, the Environmental Research Institute of UCC, Cork Healthy Cities, Green Spaces for Health, and again, Cork Environmental Forum. We see building community as of great importance, and so we hope that after each talk in this series, there'll be a chance for people to respond with comments or questions through the chat box. And if you wish, we will hope that you will be able to unmute yourself and speak live if you wish. Mary Cunningham, with the help of Alan Gray, will be dealing with the tech side. I should say that handling the technology of this is new to many of us. And Mary rightly insisted that we should walk the talk and not give in to the stereotype of technological incompetence that many of us had internalized. So I will ask you to bear with us if things go wrong. Please note as well that we'll be recording this session so that it can be available afterwards. But unless you actually ask a question and choose to unmute yourself, nobody will appear in the recording. Finally, let me give you a brief outline of our plan for this evening. In a moment, I'll hand you over to Eileen Lynch to introduce our first speaker, Neil Deuchar. Neil will speak for about 35 to 40 minutes. And after that, the discussion will be facilitated by Joan Murphy. You can put questions in the chat, and even while Neil is speaking, or at any time before that, you can, if you like, be putting in questions. Our plan is to finish between about 8:15 and 8:30, depending on the liveliness of the discussion afterwards. And we'll finish up with some information about the talk for next month. And so I hand you over now to Eileen Lynch to introduce our first speaker for tonight, Neil Deuchar.
Hello, everyone. I feel honored to introduce Dr. Neil Deuchar, and as I go on, you will see why. I first met him online quite recently when he was involved in planning a series of events for the University of the Third Age in the lead up to the UN Climate Summit in Glasgow in November. He spoke rather modestly about being nudged by his children into climate activism. But his long-standing commitment to issues of justice and sustainability quickly became clear. And I thought almost immediately that he would be the right person to give the first of these talks on spirituality and the earth. Then I've been able to discover a little bit about his extraordinary range of interests and activities and the values he's committed to. Before he retired, Neil was a consultant psychiatrist and senior health service director with the National Health Service in the West Midlands of England. During his NHS career, Neil introduced spirituality into mental health care. He encouraged active participation of people with lived experience of mental health challenges. He addressed power imbalances between healthcare professionals and clientele. He advocated for the involvement of patients and carers in service delivery. He designed processes that enabled economically disadvantaged people to develop personal leadership and agency. And he campaigned for environmental, financial, and social sustainability in health and social care systems. Since retiring, Neil has lived a rich and active life of service and is a model for us of what it means to be an elder. He has supported higher education in environmental engineering for indigenous communities in Ecuador. He has given informal advice on collectivism for farmers in the Philippines. And he has undertaken outreach in remote villages in northern Ghana. And he has established a recording studio and production infrastructure for rap artists from all backgrounds in Accra. Since his retirement, he has also completed a master's degree in ecology at Birmingham University. And he has been ordained as a spiritual counselor and interfaith minister at the One Spirit Interfaith Foundation. He currently works as a volunteer in the fields of conflict transformation, peace building, and supporting victims. He is or has been program associate at the International Charter for Forgiveness and Reconciliation, strategic advisor at the Museum of World Religions in the UK, chair of the Egalitarian Community Interest Company, strategic director of the Centre for Sustainable Healthcare, medical advisor at Next Leadership, and honorary senior research fellow in Birmingham University. He also volunteers for victim support. He has been working with Islamic Relief Academy to launch a study group on religions and development at the Development Studies Association. He works with a fledgling regenerative community in Wales, and he contributes to climate awareness in the University of the Third Age. In his few spare seconds, he has written and recorded a number of songs. He has written a book entitled You, Who You Are and Why You Matter in 2018. And he is currently writing another about his travels in India. I could go on, but if I did, there would be no time left to hear from Neil. So I will stop and hand over to Neil himself. Neil.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Eileen. I don't know where did you get all that from? Anyway, it felt like this is your life, but I'm delighted to be here and to see all your wonderful faces on my computer screen. There's 100 of you here. It's amazing, and you all look great. So let's all wave and say hi to one another. That's it. I think if we got you all to switch on your microphones, it would be chaos and shambles. But we'll get onto that a bit later. But it's lovely to be here, and I'm really delighted and honoured actually to be asked to give the first of this new series of talks, Spirituality and the Earth, being organised by Elders for Earth. And I just wanted to start just by repeating the message of the series of talks. And I quote, addressing climate change, the loss of biodiversity and environmental damage requires solid science. Equally, it suggests the importance of addressing the relationship humanity has with the earth and with people around the globe. Spiritual traditions with deep historic roots offer us insights into that relationship and into how we may respond and actively live into constructive responses to our current challenges. Spirituality, broadly defined, also informs how each of us may respond to pressing social justice issues, made more vivid and more critical by the unequal impacts of climate change and environmental degradation, including the impact on the many generations that will follow us. So that really is a fundamental and crucial agenda, and I'm really pleased to see so many people here this evening. And as Frank and Eileen have said, I'll aim to speak for about half an hour. It's 7:20 now, so if I haven't stopped and shut me up at about 7:45, 7:50. And I will say a few words about my perspective as an interfaith minister. And then if it's okay with you, I'm just going to give a little bit of an insight into one of the indigenous traditions and their viewpoint on spirituality in the earth. And then again, if it's okay with you, just hold us in just a minute or two of silent contemplation. And then a word more about interfaith and eldership, and that should easily account for half an hour. And then there'll be some time for dialogue and questions and responses. So in reflecting on this evening's task, I wanted to start from the perspective of an interfaith minister. And the training, as many of you know, for interfaith ministry involves a 2-year process of inquiry where you learn about the different philosophies and practices of the many religious traditions and spiritual expressions that exist around the world. And you also experience immersions into those traditions and expressions. And I was really struck by the similarities between the different religions and faith traditions rather than their differences. And one of the features that binds together most, if not all, faith traditions is a conscious awareness of our relationship with the earth. Whether the earth is conceived as having been created by God or a God, or whether it's conceived as manifesting its own intrinsic energy, having arisen out of a kind of nuclear event or a big bang with apparently no end. It's really the relationship with the planet that is a spiritual matter that speaks to those of any particular faith, and equally to those of no particular faith. So it's something that binds us together, and I'll say a little bit more about this a little later. Spirituality in its broadest sense, I think, finds a common ground in humanity's relationship with nature and the earth. And nowhere is that exemplified more strikingly, I think, than amongst indigenous peoples who derive their inspiration, much like shamanist, pagan and other earth-based and earth-loving traditions. They derive their inspiration from a much closer relationship with the land, a relationship that's born of mutuality, born of interdependency, and a worship of the natural world with its rain and its sun, its seasons and its tides, its fauna and flora, without any of which we would surely die. And I could draw attention to any indigenous people, for they would all, I think, demonstrate the sort of thing I'm talking about. But I've chosen this evening to mention the Hopi people, H-O-P-I, Hopi people, who are a Native American tribe, around about 20,000 strong, who live in a reservation in Arizona. The meaning of the word Hopi is, and I quote, behaving one who is mannered, civilized, peaceable. And I suppose you could contrast that with tribes or cultures who trade on violence and greed, cultures which might be a tad closer to us than we might imagine. For example, the conspicuous consumption and competitiveness that characterizes the capitalism that's right on our own doorsteps. Hopis are deeply rooted in spirituality, morality, and ethics. And to be a Hopi is to strive towards a state of reverence and respect for all things, to be at peace with all things, and to live in accordance with what Native American people often refer to as the Great Spirit, otherwise known in other parts of the world as Pachamama, or as we sometimes call her ourselves, Mother Nature, the Divine Feminine, the ground of our being, Gaia, the living earth herself. It's interesting to note that the Hopis are organized into matrilineal clans, so the children are born into the clan of their mothers, not their fathers. And that reflects an alternative to the kind of patriarchal societal systems that we've become so used to in conventional worldly culture. The changing of a woman's family name to that of a husband's, for instance, or the reference to deities in the masculine. And it reflects a reverence for femininity, but one in balance with masculinity. Neither femininity nor masculinity being located in kind of binary concepts of maleness on the one hand and femaleness in the other, but both being present in the whole of which humanity is part. And the Hopi peoples see land as sacred. They see land as sacred. They see themselves as caretakers of that land. They see it having been inherited from ancestors. They don't have a concept of land being boundaried or divided. So when they observe rituals, they do that with the intention that those ceremonies might benefit the entire world. And they respect the resonance of generations and ancestry. And like the Native American Iroquois who live further north, they believe the decisions they make today carry the energy of 7 previous generations and affect the next 7 generations. So I wonder how often did we think like that in our culture before it required science and the kind of social movement which we have here this evening to bring home to us that the impact of the things that we do, the way we behave, isn't just limited to one moment in time. And I think that what we have here with the Hopis is an example of a kind of spiritual democracy where the hierarchy that humanity has imposed on the earth, that it seems to have legitimized a plundering of the planet's resources and resulted in violence perpetrated through our relationship with other species. That's being replaced in social democracy by an acceptance that the earth provides for everything, not just us, that humanity is part of an ecological system that's intimately connected, both physically and spiritually, that being fully human is to be humble and generous in the face of that which is greater than us and gives us all that we need. And that this all means that alongside the concerns we hold for our future, there's also cause for gratitude and joy. So in that spirit, I'd like to read some excerpts from a message from White Eagle, who's a leader of the Hopi peoples, that I've adapted very slightly for the purposes of this evening, and I trust that would meet with White Eagle's blessing. And this message arrived into the world almost exactly a year ago and referred to the impending pandemic, the cause of which, of course, has at least partially had its roots in environmental damage, loss of biodiversity, and climate change. When I've read White Eagle's message, I'm going to invite us just into a few minutes of quiet reflection, and I'll sound a chimer to let us know that that's started, and then I'll sound a chimer again to let us know that it's finished. And after that, I'll just say a few more words, and then, as I say, there'll be some space for dialogue. So perhaps now we'd just like to prepare ourselves for a short moment of meditation in listening to this message, and just relax and sit back and become comfortable in our chairs or sofas or beds or wherever it is we're tuning in from, and just feeling the seat or the sofa or the bed underneath us, feeling the floor under our feet, grounding us, solid, dependable. And we relax our bodies, relax our face. Just let that tension go. And relax our shoulders. And just gradually come into our breath. Ready to receive wisdom. Message from White Eagle, Hopi Indigenous Peoples of Arizona, 16th of March, 2020. This moment that humanity is going through can be seen as a portal. If we take this opportunity to look at ourselves, rethink life and death, take care of ourselves and others, we will cross the portal. Take care of your home. Take care of your body. Connect with your spiritual home. When you are taking care of one, you are taking care of everything. Do not lose the spiritual dimension of this crisis. Have the aspect of the eagle which from above sees the whole, sees more widely. There is a social demand in this crisis. There is also a spiritual demand. Learn about resistance with Indigenous and African peoples. We have always been and continue to be exterminated, but we still haven't stopped singing, dancing, lighting fires, and having fun. Don't feel guilty about being happy during this difficult time. You don't help by being sad and without energy. It helps if good things emanate from the universe now. It is through joy that one resists. Also, when the storm passes, you will be very important in the reconstruction of this new world. You need to be well and strong. And for that, there is no other way than to maintain a beautiful, happy, and bright vibration. In shamanism, there is a rite of passage called the quest for vision. You spend a few days alone in a forest without water, without food, without protection. And when you go through that portal, you get a new vision of the world because you have faced your fears, overcome your difficulties. This is what is asked of you. What world do you want to build for yourself? For now, this is what you can do. Serenity in the storm. Be calm and pray every day. Establish a routine to meet the sacred every day. What you emanate now is the most important thing. So in the glow of those wonderful words, just move towards the final parts of what I wanted to say this evening. And just to return a little bit to the interfaith perspective, I guess a fundamental strand of the interfaith philosophy is the importance of evolving our consciousness towards a realization of the interconnectedness of everything and everyone. A realization, if you will, that the self is not an island, but a part of the whole. That the inner experience of being is a manifestation of the outer whole. An outer whole that exists for reasons or purposes that maybe can't be understood. Things like reason and purpose perhaps being human artifacts that don't really reflect the true nature of things. Language, a manifestation of the mind, useful to a certain degree, but not equivalent to the power of spirit. So in trying to describe spirit, one eventually runs out of words, and the interfaith philosophy is ultimately not one of doctrine or a set of beliefs, but rather through meditation and silent contemplation, coming into the presence of mystery, of being in the midst of that which comes from within us and yet transcends us, something beyond the distinctions of sacred and secular, something we can all share. If we leave the beliefs of our minds for a moment and seek the gentle truths that dwell in our hearts. So from an interfaith perspective, alongside the very real practicalities of what needs to be done to respond to the growing threat of climate change, the reality, the tangible reality, for example, that when I put the kettle on to make a cup of tea, it has an effect, no matter how small or distant, but it has an effect on the expectancies that a child in Bangladesh, for example, might have of living safely into their adulthood. Alongside that terrestrial reality that calls one to action, interfaith offers an invitation to feel, to experience the grief associated with what's happening around me, what I'm doing, so that action, my action, arises from an acknowledgement of interconnectedness, a kind of blurring of outer and inner, the experience of oneness, if you will, everything connected, everyone connected. And I suppose indigenous cultures may feel the same sorts of things. And that's one of the reasons I chose to focus on the Hopi peoples this evening. But there are, of course, responses to the climate crisis from all faith traditions and spiritual expressions, from humanists and non-theists, from circles of wisdom around the world, wisdom that's been handed down through thousands of years of stargazing and stories told around crackling fires. And tonight's conversation is just the first of a series of conversations that will capture at least some of that wisdom and bring it to bear on the here and now around our own campfire. And so I'd like to finish just by saying a few words about eldership, as I understand it. And I've mentioned wisdom, and I think there are many different ways of perceiving wisdom. And I'll take a couple of examples, if I may. And one is to see wisdom as the fruit of experience, the ongoing culmination of learning. And I suppose in that respect, we can expect to locate it in persons who have lived long enough to accumulate it. And there's a reasonable expectancy of the possible roles of the elder to bring the wisdom of the years to bear on the world around us, to engage in discourse, as we're doing right now, to engage with systems of power, systems that do the heavy lifting, loads of economic policy and lawmaking and legislation. And not only this, but also to hand this wisdom along to the next generation, so it's not lost, so it evolves in a spiral through the ages. This is why we look to our ancestors for guidance, and it's why we need to be in dialogue with our children and our grandchildren about the issues facing the world today. And so wisdom, existing as it may on the shoulders and in the hearts of elders, can just as readily exist, I believe, on the shoulders and in the hearts of youngsters. And nowhere has this been shown more vividly than by the leadership of the youth movement over recent years of activism in response to the issues of our time. Not only climate change, but nationalism, racism, sexism as well. These topics aren't really for this evening. Suffice it to say that intergenerational dialogue is a two-way street, I believe. Not only preserving a legacy of wisdom through the generations, but also serving to enlighten us, to enlighten elders, to carry on enlightening us. And I believe that the humility to receive and the readiness to listen, to keep on learning, is part and parcel of what it means to be an elder. And so I just bring my words to an interim conclusion. I'm sure I've talked too much already, but just to reiterate again my thanks and gratitude for the invitation to speak this evening, to declare once again my respect for all faith traditions and spiritual expressions, whatever they may be, wherever they may be from, in terms of our collective efforts to try to see our way through a crisis in our environmental status. A debt of gratitude to Indigenous peoples for teaching me so much about what it means to be in relationship with land and nature. And a big thank you to White Eagle for those words of wisdom. And I'll hand you to our moderator, Joan, via Mary maybe. And we can enter into some dialogue at this point. And thank you for hearing me. And thanks once again for inviting me to speak to you this evening.
Thanks, Neil. just to say I've been very moved by what you've shared already, and I found it just hit the right chord, I suppose, really. Maybe that tension between hope and despair might be the best way to describe it. So just to say, I have some questions already. I don't see any in the chat. I think if anybody wants to put questions in the chat, I'll offer them to Neil. And just a question, really from, maybe if you could maybe say a bit more about how elders can best support. It's a question Terry has offered. How best elders can support the younger generation in taking into account what lies ahead of them in relation to the environment and the climate crisis.
Thanks. Who was the question from? Terry?
It's from Terry, yeah.
Okay, thanks, Terry. I'm quite sure. I've got 4 screens of faces. I'm not sure if yours is on the one in front of me. Let me just see if I can. Terry O'Sullivan, is it?
Yeah.
Yes, I have you. Hi, Terry. There you are. I've got you on my screen. Thanks a lot for the question. Well, I guess I travel quite a bit in India, and I'm a big fan of Mahatma Gandhi. And as you probably know, one of Mahatma Gandhi's most famous sayings was or is, "Be the change that you want to see in the world." And I don't know, when I first heard that, I kind of it poleaxed me. It changed everything, and you can try and change everything around you, but ultimately it needs to start from within. And so, coming at your question slightly obliquely, I believe that elders can first of all set an example through what we do and being clear about why we do what we do. And to tackle the complexities of the practicalities of our response to climate change. So we know that we need to try to aim towards living more simply. We can't just suddenly take a tent off to a piece of land and grow stuff. Not all of us, not many of us would have the skills to do that. I certainly wouldn't. Not all of us would be able to physically do that. So we have to try to work out for ourselves what simplicity means for each of us individually. And that's a conversation that I think is well worth having. I've for many years been enchanted with the monastic ways of various faith traditions, and in love with one of the central intentions of monasticism, which is to live in a way that we are called to do now more than ever, by becoming simpler in our needs and wants. So something around using our years of experience in learning and collectives such as this, with all of these resources that we have present now, to tackle some of the practical issues would be immensely helpful, I think. And then, as Frank was saying before, to then kind of attach that to conversations and discourse, or intergenerational dialogue, as we rather poshly refer to it as, but a conversation at least between ourselves as a group of elders wrestling with these issues and moving forwards into clarity and action, and younger people who can learn a great deal from our research and the changes that we've made, and from whom we can continue learning in that two-way dialogue. I think those are the two main aspects of the response I would give to that question, Terry.
Yes, thank you very much. I find young people really concerned and active now, and very inspiring, actually. I agree. And I think what you said, I mean, three things struck me about what you said. Living simply, so that old phrase we know, that others may simply live, but living simply really speaks to me. Yes, thank you. And intergenerational dialogue. I think we can learn as much from them as they may from us as well. Actually, it's lovely to have that connection with the younger people now. I feel more connected, and I feel they have a deep spirituality. Somebody said to me once, "What'll happen if they lose the faith?" You know, and I said, and it just feels like they're quite deeply spiritual, a lot of these young people now, and that's so encouraging in a deep way, not in the traditional kind of having to follow something for the sake of following it, you know, because your parents did or such. And I think what you said about example, I remember when my two children were young, somebody said to me once, your greatest gift to them will be your example. And it always struck me. And my oldest daughter still has that phrase. She still throws out that phrase to me sometimes, when maybe I'm not giving the best example, I don't know. But she remembers that. And yeah, thank you for your very inspiring talk and that address from White Eagle. I really loved it. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Neil, Mary has submitted a question. It's more little bit more personal to you, I think. It's just saying that you've lived a life of exemplary service to the community and to the well-being of people. And her question really is, what led you to that life? Were there any significant events, or I suppose she's curious, I suppose, about how your direction unfolded for you in your life. Well, maybe she could speak for herself too. Sorry. Anyway,
Hi, Neil. I'm just wondering, were there any like turning points in your life, just moments, you know, where you maybe changed direction or it cemented, you know, I suppose an orientation towards, I suppose, your service to the earth, your service to other people. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. I think they probably have been. I spent quite a lot of my earlier life being completely oblivious to issues relating to the environment. This would have been in the 60s and 70s, when there really wasn't any excuse then for not knowing about it, because there were publications about it and so on and so forth, but we weren't taught about it in school really. And it wasn't something that sort of was on my radar really. I had my career in medicine was focused obviously on trying to help people who are in mental health difficulties and crises and so on and so forth. But again, we did institute kind of a sustainability in processes in the organisations that I worked for. So there was a sort of a gradual unfolding of an awareness of environmental issues that brought to bear on the way that I operated in managing health services. I guess a lot of us will be familiar with the effect of a personal setback or a personal disaster, on our openness to truth and, in due course, wisdom. And that's certainly been present in my life. I can think of a couple of occasions when I have faced huge difficulties, mostly in my own doing, I have to say, following which I became vulnerable not only to feeling unwell and being unwell, but I also became open to learning, open to spiritual development. My consciousness became open to evolving, and I firmly hold it close to my heart, really. That I think it was Rumi that wrote a poem along the lines of, it's not a disaster to have a broken heart, because a broken heart lets in the light. And I think those a couple of occasions in my life where I've reached the depths and not known how to go forward, actually in retrospect were opportunities for development. And I suppose the third thing I'd say is that my experience of the interfaith ministry inquiry, followed by spending quite a bit of time in India with Hindu monks, and also people who have for a number of decades now been striving to bring together Catholic monastic tradition and Hindu monastic tradition, mainly in the south of India. Absolutely wonderful environments where the spirituality is somehow deepened for that coming together. And I think really being in that environment and seeing the poverty around me there fired me up again to remain engaged and involved in giving, but also to be honest about the fact that when we give, we also develop ourselves, and it's a two-way street. So yeah, I see making attempts to give as something that also develops me. Yeah, I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you. You know, you had mentioned grief earlier as well in your talk, and you know, it does seem like that grief and love can be very much part of the process, I suppose, towards both care of ourselves and care of each other and the earth. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Neil, Martha Cashman said her screen is damaged, but she wants to ask for advice on how to respond to somebody who sees no value. Sorry, to find it again. No value to the presence of an eco-awareness garden in a public area we share, and tries to stop it. Being the change we want to see can be difficult without support at times.
Yes, just can you just repeat what actually happened?
Sorry, she said, Martha says that how she would like advice on how to respond to somebody who sees no value in the presence of an eco-awareness garden in a public area, a shared public area, and they try to stop it.
Okay. Well, if we go back to Gandhi, I think the one of the ways in which one can respond to that is just by continuing to peacefully do what you are you believe is the right thing to do. And there may be resistance to developing an eco-awareness garden in the local park or wherever it is. And I don't know what the reasons for that might be. But my advice would be just to continue doing it. There may also be ways and means of connecting with the system. So I don't know what the specifics of the circumstances are, but it may well be that the town council or local authority would be supportive of doing something like this. Or it may, of course, be that the person who's resisting it is in the town council or the local authority. I don't know which way round it is. I would hope that it's the former scenario, because town councils and local authorities do have the corporate responsibility and accountability for the well-being of their citizenship. And it is well known that human well-being depends, at least in part, on having access to green space and having access to peaceful environments in which we can connect. This isn't just plucked out of the ether. This is formalized and written up as a result of years of research, mainly by the New Economics Foundation, who have confirmed that well-being in human beings is associated with learning, with connecting, with giving, with being physically active, and noticing, by which is meant being aware of what's going on around one and feeling in connection. So there are, by taking recourse to that, there are very robust arguments for creating an environment for people, particularly in urban areas, where people can access the wherewithal or the means to these sources of well-being. It's amazing, isn't it, how the truth will out.
That's a very inspiring answer there, Neil. Thank you. Because that has been on our discussion list as well, developing community gardens. Does anybody else want to ask from the floor, as it were, the virtual floor? And just to say, Frank and Maureen have put up links for the White Eagle address as well. Okay, I think there might be another question.
Joan, with the question then, and just can I check with Mary that everybody has the capacity to unmute themselves so that people can come in if they want. And Neil, I have a lot of stuff going on in me in response to your talk, so thank you so much. The last bit that came to my mind was to do with our challenge as elders facing our own deaths. And that's a challenge that we all have to face. But I'm wondering, would you say something about the possibility that we as a human race, as a species, are also facing our own deaths, facing our own suicide, in fact? And how you see the interfaith community or tradition finding hope. And I know that hope is a very complicated word, so I don't necessarily mean optimism, but finding hope in the face of the death of our civilization, our culture, our species as a whole. I know that the tradition I was brought up with in a very simple form put the hope into a next life. I don't think all Christianity does that in quite such a simplified way now. But I'm wondering about what wisdom we as elders can bring to the question that so many of us find really hard to face, that we may be literally wiping out the human species.
Thank you, Frank. Well, yes, I mean, I suppose that we would accept a phrase such as the next life, both in its spiritual and its literal sense. And so concentrating on its literal sense just for a moment, we know that there's going to be next lives of people who are younger than us. If we vary in our concept of what happens to us subjectively, personally, after we die, there's certainly one thing that we can agree on, and that's that we are leaving a legacy for next lives on Earth, people who are younger, the younger generations. So there is a responsibility on all of us, and it will come to the next generation, and it will come to the generation after that as well, to do whatever we can individually and collectively to leave the planet in a better state than we were born into it. That said, we know, as you are intimating, Frank, that we are in dire straits. And we know that we have already gone past a point of irreversibility, certainly in terms of weather changes and sea level rises, which we know are going to affect tens of thousands of people. And if we're not very careful, without getting embroiled in politics, although we can if you like, but if we're not very careful, it will all get worse, and our children's children will live in a very different world to the one that we have around us now. From an interfaith perspective, I'm going to come back to the relationship between inner and outer. So one can look at what's going on around one and be motivated into action to address it, and that's fine. An interfaith perspective would also invite an internal meeting of self and other, so that the world around us is seen to reflect us, to be a mirror. And that's a kind of spiritual expression of, when I put the kettle on to make a cup of tea, somebody halfway around the world might be affected by that. But the spiritual manifestation of that is made manifest in interfaith spirituality by the connection of inside and outside. So to finally get to the nub of my response to your question, from an interfaith perspective, the degradation and aging and slow death of the world, which you could argue is occurring, is connected with our own personal experience of aging, of illness, and our own personal relationship with our own death. And And so a coming, or a process where that can be addressed in one way, shape or form would seem to be an important aspect of coming to terms with what is happening in the world around us. And the second reason I think it's important is because if the grief that one feels about the loss of one's own life is connected with the grief that one feels about what one sees going on in the world at the moment, then the response to the outside, the response to what's going on in the world becomes arguably a little bit more authentic, because it comes from within one, it comes from a place of honesty and vulnerability and love for Earth, love for one's home, love for the people who are going to be living here after we ourselves have passed on. So I think, in conclusion, from an interfaith perspective, and of course this does not distinguish interfaith clearly from many, many other religious and faith traditions, nor does it distinguish those from humanist and non-theistic positions, but I can only speak from an interfaith point of view, and that is one where the boundary of one's skin between what's going on inside one and what's going on outside is a physical boundary, but one which can be transcended through relating to the world through and from one's heart as well as one's mind.
I'm I'm not sure if I heard you fully there adequately, Neil, but I'm not sure that you're taking seriously what I said about what it would be to actually face the end of the human race, and which is a real possibility now. A lot of indigenous religion, I think, kind of trusts in the next generation, 7 generations, as you said, and somehow finds its hope in the living on of the further generations and the legacy we leave. I find it much harder if I dare to let in the possibility that there will be no legacy. I find myself very challenged. I often quote a phrase from Václav Havel, where he says, hope is not at all the same as optimism. And in a way, my question, I suppose, that I'm struggling to articulate is, if optimism is gone, how do we still cultivate hope? And maybe it's love we need to cultivate, but where if we really let in the possibility that there will be no other humans to take our legacy, it may take several generations for that to happen, but that the human race, as every other species, will end, and that this will end, but that we may be hastening that. So it's hope in the face of the total lack of optimism. Perhaps you've answered that and that I haven't caught it.
Yeah, no, sorry, I didn't mean to appear as if I wasn't taking it seriously. I think the one way of looking at it, of course, is that the planet was absolutely fine before the advent of human beings, and it may well be the case that it would be absolutely fine if human beings weren't around anymore. I suppose this goes to the heart of philosophical and theological debate and inquiry into the role of humanity and issues of stewardship. But if one is to take a pessimistic view, that the end of the human race will come about as a result of what has already happened and what it appears to be too late to turn around, then the interfaith perspective would be that the hope is therefore not necessarily for humanity, but the hope is for Earth. The hope is for the planet. The hope is that the planet will recover from the assault that humanity has made on her and will go on to an afterlife which we cannot conceive, but which will represent her recovery and flourishing. And that is something which one can remain hopeful about, albeit in the context of an exercise of extreme humility.
Thank you, Neil.
Neil, there was Helen made a long comment. I was wondering, would she like to make it herself to you, Helen? If you want to unmute yourself.
Thanks, Joan. Hi, Neil, and thank you for your very, very inspiring comments there. I'm just asking there in my comment, as Irish people, I think one of the things I often come across myself, and I'm sure other people do as well, is that this kind of resistance to the word spirituality in the Irish people. When you talk to Irish people, some of them certainly, they kind of confuse spirituality and religion, and I think that's possibly a legacy of our history, where there was a lot of oppression, there was a lot of I suppose genocide, without whitewashing it. There was certainly a huge personal danger in expressing our traditional and indigenous beliefs over our history. And I think until we start reclaiming what we had and honouring it and celebrating our own indigenous wisdom, and while a lot of it may be lost, there is still remnants of it there. And it's in our DNA, I'm sure, as well. We had a deep ancestral spiritual connection with the earth and with the land. And that was enshrined in our traditions and in our culture, in our laws, Brehon laws. I think as long as we don't do that, as long as we kind of don't get familiar with that again and reclaim it, I think we'll always struggle to bring spirituality back into our lives, because it's been an enormous loss to us, I think, as a people, that has been lost. And I mean, there are so many parallels with Indigenous people from all over the world when you look back in our history and look back at what we had. And I just think it's something that certainly we don't see any leadership in this from, at least I haven't seen it from the people that are leading us. I haven't seen any real guidance in that direction to start looking at this. And I think we're lost as a people, to be honest, to a point. Maybe I'm just going on too long now, but I don't know if you get that, if you get what I'm talking about.
Oh, thanks, Helen. Well, I don't think I could put it much better than you just have, actually. But from an interfaith perspective, the intention, or the inquiry, is to try to learn as much as one can from all of the faith traditions and spiritual expressions, and to really stand on the shoulders of those traditions, in order to be able to leave the confines, if you like, of each individual belief system and express oneself in whatever way one feels called to personally. And there, of course, what you're making reference to, Helen, I think is the centuries, possibly thousands of years of heritage and tradition of connection with the land and with nature, which kind of fuels a personal sense of groundedness, which is not incompatible with religion, but which is not dependent on religion. And so the interfaith perspective would encourage a kind of sense of personal freedom, which honours and respects all of the religions, and indeed draws from those wisdom traditions, whilst at the same time creating the conditions in which any individual can reclaim what they believe lies at the core of their being, deriving as it may from their ancestry, from generations of families, and from a personal feeling in the heart of what one wishes to connect to. And I think that most interfaith ministers would see that as a kind of really important aspect of enabling people to reclaim their own authority, their own personal authority, in an environment which is not anti-religious, but honours religions without finding a necessity to be part of them. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. Thanks, Neil.
I just want to flag the time here now. It's going on for 8:25, so we might finish it up in a few minutes.
Can I ask a question, Neil? Are there any practices that help you, I suppose, sustain you in your ministry and in your life? If you want to share, you don't if you don't want. You don't have to if you don't want. I'm just wondering, how do you sustain yourself?
Well, I'm my partner is just beside me, and I also have the privilege of holding meditation, little meditation sessions. Every morning a small group of us meditate. One of my meditators, at least one of them is here actually, I can see. That's brilliant. And then on Sunday mornings we have a larger gathering, and this is part of what we call the Open Monastery, which is a kind of an interfaith orientated monastic path, which is basically predicated on on silent contemplation and meditation on a regular basis, and that's really helpful, and actually is the sort of is the core of my daily spiritual practice. I also love being out and about in nature. I love going on walks where my legs aren't playing up. I also like running, I'm doing a creative writing course at the moment as well. I think Eileen mentioned at the start that I'm trying to write a book about my experiences of traveling in India. And I'm finding that really, really interesting and kind of affirming. So yeah, and I also play, I play guitar badly, and I play piano even worse, but I really enjoy doing those things as well. I love music, and sometimes when words fail us, even sometimes when poetry fails us, music can find a note of communication which somehow says more. So all those things.
Thanks, Neil. I just want to anybody else who wants to say anything or comment, or otherwise I guess I'll draw it to a close. Any of my helpers want to say anything there?
Could I ask
Eileen?
one quick thing that I was very interested in reading about you, Neil, and the many sources that I looked up. And it was about introducing spirituality into the mental health field. And I suppose I was really interested in that, to see how I know it's a bit different now from some of the other stuff we've been discussing, but it was, I suppose, you know, I'm kind of very curious about it, because I believe that we kind of have disconnected ourselves from ourselves, but also from other people, and that we have allowed people with mental health challenges to carry the burden for us. And so I was just kind of wondering how you did that and what happened and how, you know, how it's played out, I suppose. Yeah.
Spirituality and mental health.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, that was born in an impression that mental. This was back in the 80s and 90s, quite a long time ago now. That was born of an impression that that psychiatry in particular offered a kind of rather reductive model of diagnosis and treatment to patients. Whereas I felt, as did a lot of us actually, that it should be more of a holistic practice than that, really, both in terms of contact with service users, but also in terms of leadership of clinical teams and so on and so forth. So there was a group of us. I was lucky enough to be working in Birmingham in a multicultural setting. So there were many people I was working with who were not, how shall I put it, as squeamish about spiritual matters as some people, and they were quite straightforward about the importance of knowing about different religions when managing service users. So if you're treating a Muslim, then you need to know the very basics of the fact that they won't be able to give the medication during Ramadan and stuff like that, you know, practicalities. And this grew into a kind of a movement, really, where the psychiatrists became increasingly interested in understanding service users, not just from a sort of psychosocial perspective, but also from a spiritual one as well, in terms of how does this person see the world, and how does that interact with the mental illness and their relationships within the family and the community, and so on and so forth. And we also attached a little research project to that, and and found that in taking a kind of a spiritual viewpoint towards the service user, that reduced the necessity or reduced the likelihood of requiring medication. It also reduced the likelihood of being admitted to hospital. So with that crucial bit of evidence, we then argued for a chunk of money to set up a formal program of spirituality in Birmingham. And I'm delighted to say that that led to a model which then extended across the countries. Spirituality is now, I think, if not part and parcel, it's certainly much more closer to the nub of how most people go about mental health care. So, yeah. Oh, and also most of the staff, particularly doctors, but also nurses and all sorts of other clinicians, were encouraged by this to be more honest about their vulnerabilities in the workplace and be seen as three-dimensional human beings with, you know, feelings and vulnerabilities. And once that was made more explicit, then more empathic management processes began slowly to arise as a result of that. So I think from various points of view, it was great, and hopefully still is, and requires, if not an interfaith, certainly a multi-faith approach, because of the nature of the societies that we live and work in.
Thank you, Neil. Yeah, that's very, very interesting. And thank you for your talk. I found it really inspiring. So glad that you're here. Yeah, and that with that, both Frank and I made that contact with you in online, in the UK online. Yeah.
Well, I've really enjoyed being here, and I'm delighted that so many of us could make it this evening. I can't see you all at the same time, so I've been sort of going from screen to screen just to see as many of you as I possibly can, and it's so great having all these lovely faces on my computer screen, and it's delightful to meet you all, and yeah,